Good morning. It is a good morning because America has rejected Trumpism. It's put a constraint, a limit on Trump's demagogic presidency. Now, of course, I and many of you would have preferred the Senate to flip, but no one seriously expected that because Democrats had to defend 26 seats in the Senate compared with only 9 that Republicans had to defend in 2018. That is the mathematics of the Senate this year. So that was not a huge disappointment. In fact, that was the expectation. But the real battleground, that was the House, where Democrats had to achieve a net gain of 23 seats to get the 2018 needed for a majority, and they did. Trump was not on the ballot, but he made the election into a referendum on himself. So Americans turned against the House Republicans, who should have acted as a check on him, but did nothing. In many cases, they magnified his vileness. So savor the victory, folks. We have repudiated Donald Trump, or at least set a constraint on him, on his demagoguing. In fact, despite his demagoguing over immigrants, George Soros, despite Republican gerrymandering and voter suppression, unprecedented, by the way, since the Voting Rights Act of 1965, despite Trump's relentless marketing of hate and fear, echoed and amplified by right-wing media, there was victory, at least in the House. So savor it, savor the victory, but don't believe for a moment that our national nightmare is over. Donald Trump still occupies the White House, and in all likelihood, he's going to be there for another 2 years, even if Robert Mueller is allowed to complete his investigation. And by the way, I'm almost certain that Trump will fire Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, and Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and Mueller, Rob Mueller, very soon. Even if that Mueller investigation did produce or produces clear evidence that Trump was deeply involved in Russian efforts to throw the 2016 election to him, even if the House uses this evidence to impeach Trump, there is not a snowball's chance the Senate is going to convict Trump of impeachment and send him packing. Not in American history has the Senate ever actually convicted a president and sent that president away. Richard Nixon decided on his own to leave, and Trump is not going to decide on his own to leave. So he will be there for another 2 years, and let me warn you, he could be there for, well, let's be brutally realistic about this. He could be there for another 6 years, because since the end of World War II, there's been only one time when one political party occupied the White House for just one 4-year stretch, and that was between 1976 and 1980 when Jimmy Carter was president. And you can bet that Trump will do whatever he can to remain in power because he doesn't care about the Constitution. He doesn't care about any constraints on his power. In fact, he sees a constraint and he goes after that constraint. And of course, the Republican Party remains in control of the Senate. And Fox News remains Trump's propaganda ministry. The line between Fox and Trump, which was already blurred, vanished completely at Trump's last pre-election rally when Fox hosts Sean Hannity and Jeanine Pirro joined him on stage. Well, the American people will be subject to more of Trump's lies and hate as amplified by Senate Republicans and Fox News. I can guarantee it. And with the Democrats in control of the House, you can count on the fact that Trump is going to be scapegoating House Democrats for anything that goes wrong. He scapegoats anybody for anything that goes wrong. The House Democrats are going to be an easy target. American politics will almost certainly become even meaner, coarser, uglier. We're going to remain deeply and angrily divided. Trump will also turn more to foreign policy, where he has a freer hand, and where a Democratic House won't be able to stop him from causing potentially large damage to our traditional alliances and havoc on trade. But to me, most worrisome, honestly, is that America still won't be able to respond to the real threats that continue to grow. And I'm not talking about Trump's fake threats of immigrant caravans and immigrants pouring over our borders and foreign traders. No, I'm talking about the threats that Trump and his enablers have worsened: climate change, the suppression of votes, and foreign intrusion into our elections, the most expensive and least effective healthcare system in the world, and not the least, widening inequalities of income, wealth, and political power. So the question is, what is next? The Democrats' first order of business in the House that they will be controlling will be to investigate the conflicts of interest, the ethics violations, and the scandals that Republicans have ignored for the past 2 years. The most important tool at their disposal is going to be the subpoena power, which will give them the legal authority to demand records and compel witnesses to testify about Trump's dealings. Front and center is going to be Trump's tax returns. And by the way, the House Ways and Means Committee has, by law, the right specifically to subpoena a president's tax returns, anybody's tax returns for that matter. They are going to use this power. These records could reveal Trump's connection to Russia, money laundering, other tax fraud. Now, Trump is going to undoubtedly fight the subpoenas in court. You're going to hear a lot about executive privilege, but it could come at a significant political cost to his presidency. I'm sure a lot of dirty wash is going to be aired. We're going to see a lot of things that no president, since the Teapot Dome scandal of the first part, Warren G. Harding administration, first part of the 20th century, we're not going to see as much kickbacks, conflicts of interest. Now, Democrats could also use their subpoena power to look at Trump's business deals as president. The Constitution's Emoluments Clause clearly prevents the president from accepting payments from foreign governments. And yet we know as president, Trump has received foreign payments through his hotels. So expect Democrats to look into the Emoluments Clause. And there are a whole host of other conflicts of interest surrounding other members of the Trump administration that will also come into play. Now, meanwhile, the media also has to stop letting Trump play them. I mean, Trump totally fabricated the immigrant caravan as a major threat to national security, for example, and yet every major media outlet, including the New York Times, gave the caravan story top billing for days. You see, Trump doesn't just use lies to play the media. He also plays the media by setting the media's agenda with his lies, deciding what's going to be the story of the day or the week, diverting attention from the big issues. If Americans are going to be able to know the truth and deal with the truth, the media cannot be so easily played. So we have, hopefully, a media that is a little bit more sophisticated now about Trump and what he does. And we have Democrats in the House who are going to reveal a lot of what's going on. And there may also possibly be an impeachment. I'm not ruling that out. The point is, America will eventually overcome and reverse Trumpism. We have now set firm limits, and let us thank each other for doing that. Now, the harder challenge, honestly, is going to be to reverse the reasons Trump and his Republican lapdogs gained power in the first place. It was not an accident. Look at the results of yesterday's elections, and what do you see? An even sharper division than we saw 2 years ago. The divide in America is between, on the one side, older, whiter, non-college educated voters, and everybody else, younger, less white, more urban, and college educated. It's not Republican versus Democrat. Forget party labels. It's Trump's old, white, non-college American versus young people, black people, Latinos, college educated, who rejected Trump. This is the division in America, folks. Now, some people blame racism and nativism for this division, but these toxins, racism, nativism, they've been poisoning America since the founding of the Republic. What is new has been the interaction between them, that is racism and nativism, and the long economic slide of tens of millions of working Americans, most of them white and lacking college degrees. They used to be the bedrock of the Democratic Party. Many of them were members of trade unions, whose strength in numbers gave them an increasing share of the gains from economic growth. They used to be Democrats. Their long economic slide generated the kinds of frustrations that demagogues throughout history have twisted into rage at them. Meanwhile, most economic gains over the last 35 years have gone to the top 1%, whose wealth is now greater than the combined wealth of the bottom 90%, giving them at the top enough political muscle to demand and get tax cuts, Wall Street bailouts, corporate subsidies, regulatory rollbacks, and these in turn have created even more wealth at the top. Now, these were all trends before Trump. Can I just make sure you understand this? We all are playing on the same set of understandings, yet Democrats failed to reverse these trends. The trends of so much of America being on a downward escalator. The trends of the top 1% or fewer than 1% getting most of the gains from growth. Democrats failed to reverse these trends, even though Democrats occupied the White House most of these years over the last 35, and during 4 of them controlled both houses of Congress. Now, Trump, granted, has worsened these trends by slashing taxes on the wealthy and corporations, whittling back the Affordable Care Act, loosening restrictions on Wall Street. Jobs may be back, but they pay squat, especially compared with the rising costs of housing, healthcare, and education. And the jobs that people are getting are less secure than ever. 1 in 5 is now headed by a worker under contract, without any unemployment insurance, sick leave, retirement savings, which presumably is why Trump decided to focus the midterms on hate and fear rather than the economy. Yes, the data showed a good economy, but the average person in America doesn't feel like it's such a good economy. So Trump thereby created a large opening. And here's the good news. Not just the Democrats have taken back the House, but there is now a large opening for Democrats aiming for 2020. Democrats can become the party of the bottom 90%. How can they do this? By creating a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition, college, non-college educated, to wrest back control of our economy and democracy. This new coalition would focus on 2 big things. First, raising the purchasing power of the bottom 90% through stronger unions, a larger wage subsidy, starting with the bigger earned income tax credit, Medicare for all, and second, getting big money out of politics. Public financing of elections, full disclosure of all sources of political funding, and end the revolving door between business and government. Now, the worst thing Democrats could do now would be to misinterpret this election and try moving to the so-called center. The center no longer exists because most Americans are no longer on the traditional right or left. The traditional right or left, those labels don't mean anything. The vast majority of Americans are now anti-establishment, and understandably anti-establishment. So the practical choice today is either Donald Trump's authoritarian populism, backed by the moneyed interests, or a new democratic populism, backed by the rest of us. The direction could not be clearer. This should be the Democrats' hour. And now for your questions. Your question is, Tim Stebbins, why do the Democrats have that can take on Trump in 22? Oh, who? Sorry, Tim, I couldn't read your writing. Who do the Democrats have that can take on Trump in 2020? A strong, well-spoken candidate is very needed. Well, Tim, there are a lot of Democratic candidates. In fact, within probably the next 2 months, by my count, there are going to be at least 12 Democratic candidates. And a lot of them are very attractive. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. We've got, obviously, Bernie. Well, it's not so obvious. I mean, Bernie Sanders, I think, is going to come in, and he's also going to run for president again. We're going to have a lot of senators who have expressed interest, at least quietly expressed interest, I believe. Now, there are also people we don't even know about. I mean, let me just remind you that most people didn't even know about Barack Obama. 2 years, 3 years before he first ran in 2008. So there are going to be stars. Beto O'Rourke is somebody that a lot of people are very interested in, even though he did not win. He put up a very good fight. He was very articulate. I would just wait and see. Now, I know of at least 3 billionaires who want to get into the race. I am not necessarily advocating that you pay much attention to billionaires. There is nothing about a billionaire that strikes me as necessarily useful for putting together a coalition of the bottom 90%. Billionaires don't naturally and inevitably create coalitions of the bottom 90%, but who knows? They might. I mean, rich people, FDR, John F. Kennedy, it's possible. All right. DK Lim, impeachment pending. Well, I think that the House, and I want to make this absolutely clear, if there is evidence, if within the next day, by the way, I think Mueller is going to be fired very, very soon. It could be today. It could be tomorrow. I mean, Donald Trump now is not constrained by an election coming up. And so he has made very clear that he is not under any obligation to keep Mueller. I think he may be firing Mueller. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was today, tomorrow, or the next day, or sometime very, very soon. The question is Mueller's investigation. Mueller has a lot of evidence. I hope Mueller has that evidence in a place where the House Democrats can get at it very easily. If they do, if they can, and if that evidence shows clearly and unambiguously that there is and was a connection between Donald Trump and the Russians and Vladimir Putin with regard to rigging the 2016 election and maybe even continuing to try to affect elections in the United States, well, then that's enough evidence to get him impeached, Donald Trump impeached. But then you got to go to the Senate for a conviction on impeachment. And with the Senate in Republican hands, that's going to be awfully, awfully difficult. Okay, Mark Berezanski. Did the Trump administration sustain a victory by keeping the Senate, or was the whole election more of a referendum on his administration? Mark, I want to be very clear with you. I never expected, and I think that very, very few people who are watching, who are kind of know how the Senate works and how politics works at a kind of detailed, granular level, expected the Senate to flip. It would have been great. But that was really out of the question, given the huge number of Democrats, 20, who were up for election relative to Republicans. So this election that we just had is, to me, a total repudiation of Donald Trump because the House really was where the action was. The House was the playing field on which winners and losers were determined, and Donald Trump lost the House. The Republicans lost the House. Donald Trump made this election a referendum on himself. And that House loss is a huge loss. He is now constrained as he has not been, finally, thankfully. Now, it's not an absolute loss, but it is a repudiation. Murray Balesta is Beto O'Rourke, the new Obama. Murray, it is possible. As I said before, I'm looking at Beto very, very carefully. I hope you are too, because what he did, he not only did remarkably well in Texas, but he also was articulate. He was convincing. The next president, or the candidate, Democrats' next candidate, has got to have certain qualities that Beto had, in my judgment, and may still, and I think has. One of them has to do with a kind of indignation about what has happened in this country. A second is an authenticity, the ability to actually project that indignation and to do it in a way that feels not political, that feels like the person is actually talking from his or her heart. And thirdly, an understanding of the facts. Because if there was ever a contrast to Donald Trump, who basically wings everything, doesn't understand anything. I mean, he's a great marketer, but he doesn't understand anything about a true reality in America. Well, you need somebody who combines all of these and also has the power to stand up to bullying. The power to say to Donald Trump, if it ever comes to it, "Sir, you are wrong." And sotto voce, not saying it with these words, but saying, "You are shameful. You are indecent." Okay, Vicki Tyler. Although numbers were good, too few still voted. How do we get more people involved beyond the election? Vicki, I was very pleased to turn out. Now, we don't have all of the numbers yet on turnout, but it seems to me turnout, from what I saw and from what I heard, was remarkable. We can always need more turnout. More turnout is good for Democrats. More turnout is good for the people. Less turnout is always good for Republicans. They're always going to be fighting against turnout. Voter suppression is a big, big, big problem. Now, what do we do to get turnout higher for 2020? It seems to me that this election, 2018 rather, is a step in the right direction, because a lot of people who were very cynical and said, my vote doesn't count, they saw that votes do count. We flipped the House. That's an important beginning point. The second point, and this is a general point about social change, positive social change in America. You need to have three things for positive social change. And I want to make this very, 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 very clear. And it's true historically, and it's going to be true in the future. Number one, for positive social change, you need to have an awareness in the public of the truth of what's happening. You can't have them blinded by demagoguery and lies. So you have to have very strong truth-telling. Number two, people have got to see that there is a huge difference between what is, that is, those truths around them, whether we're talking about poverty, the environment, we're talking about voter suppression, whatever, those truths and the ideal that people have about what should be, what this country represents, what it could and should represent, what it should strive for. And number three, very important, besides the truth and the ideals, and people seeing the gap between them, people have got to have some sense that it is possible to change the country toward those ideals. If they feel hopeless, if they feel cynical, we're never going to get any social change at all. Social change happens when people understand the truth, see the gap between the truth and their ideals, and number three, have a sense of efficacy and agency. And I believe all of those are pending in the sense that this election of 2018 is a step toward people getting and understanding all of those. So we're not there yet. And many of you who are discouraged, still discouraged, I say to you, savor what has happened and understand that this fight is long. maybe never ending. We'll never get to perfection, we'll never get to the ideals. But it is the most important fight you can ever be engaged in. Thank you, as always, a special thank you to Shada Azamian, Omri Shir Dalal, and Andrew Santana. Keep the faith.